Okay.
Now, if I can add on to that, I sent out an email with the address for our YouTube channel, which is titled Journey CSL Thrive. And Clark, I just sent the email to you. And Joanne, if you would like the email sent to you with that exact address or the link to it, just put your email address in the chat and I'll send that to you as well. Okay.
Thank you, Reverend Lynn. So good evening, everybody. This session is one of our monthly Thrive sessions, and the topic of choice, my name is Dianne Bridges, and the topic of choice this evening is forgiveness. And if I may, please, I think Reverend Stu Allen or Reverend Lynn, one of you were going to do our opening invitation. If I may invite you to do that now, please, I'd appreciate that. That'd be awesome.
I'm happy to do that if you like.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So let's everybody just take a breath and recognize that this moment right here is the only moment there is. And this is the circle that is created by each and every individual with their heart and mind that connects to this Thrive service and to Inner Journey. And how beautiful that is. And in this moment, I recognize that there really is only one. It is the one that is here right now within each individual, within the center of the circle, and it is the circle. And I am so glad to know that presence that is all in everything. It is in the electronics, it is in the light, it is in the view of the aspens out Diane's window, it is in the nature that is in Susan's video there, her camera, and in the heart and mind and home of each person. And knowing that we come together tonight, there's no accident that we've all come together for this topic that Dianne brings us as our speaker tonight on forgiveness. Knowing that forgiveness is a divine activity of source mind, I recognize that it moves our lives and changes us as we move into that idea of forgiveness and the activity of it, releasing what is good to release and allowing ourselves to be free. And so there is great joy and anticipation in what Dianne will share with us. And so I know that each person is open to receiving what resonates with them and looking forward to conversations so that we all share and join in. And so I give thanks for this moment and this time. And so it is.
And so it is. Thank you, Reverend Lynn. That was just absolutely lovely. I appreciated that. You know, I many times when I do these talks, as you know, I typically stay in line with the theme, the monthly theme and weekly theme of our community for spiritual living. I decided to deviate from that this time around for I've had a very recent experience that has required a lot of reflection and a lot of work on forgiveness. And I'm still working on it, to be honest with you. And in this situation, you know, my immediate gut reaction was to get defensive, you know, in response to someone and an attack. And I mean, I didn't, but it was very hard for me. It's a long story. And I'm not going to go through the details this evening, but it was very hard for me, I'll admit, to pause, to remember really who I am and who we all are, and refrain from getting defensive and attacking. And so as part of that work, I turned to some books that and approaches on forgiveness, including Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping. Right. And then also Emmett Fox in Sermon on the Mount talks about Jesus and forgiveness. And then, of course, how the universe is, knowing that this talk would transpire today in the Unity Daily Reading, of course, it's got forgiveness. So what I'd like to do this evening is talk a bit about radical forgiveness and that construct, knowing that it might be repetitive to some of you. Hopefully there's one snippet that you take away. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Emmett Fox, and time permitting, we can wrap up with a small individual exercise. So that's the thought for this evening. And, back to the Colin tipping, when I went back to it, I'll express an opinion here. It can be particularly heady, particularly it's comprehensive. For example, he has this great worksheet in here, and there's 22 different questions to go through. And I've used that worksheet in the past, a long time ago, and it was quite effective. In all honesty, what I do typically is a much more honed down approach to my forgiveness, release, and embrace process. So that's what I'm really going to talk about, is honing that down just a tad. First of all, though, I'd like to start off by talking at a macro level, the difference between what I also call traditional forgiveness and radical forgiveness. There are similarities. You use your compassion and your tolerance and your mercy, and those types of characteristics are obviously present in both types of forgiveness. Traditional, and I'm leveraging the constructs again in this book, right, with my slant. I just want to give appropriate reference, though. This material is not all Dianne Bridges' thought. The traditional way of forgiving is a way of living, we would say, at a macro level, probably across the world. Radical forgiveness, and that traditional, is, we forgive, and there many times is a need to condemn the party that is hurt, right, in that forgiving process. Radical forgiveness is really relying on spiritual elements, a different level of consciousness where we forgive, and there is no condemnation. In Colin's book, he has 11 different differences between traditional forgiveness and radical. I'm only going to emphasize about 3. In the traditional, when something's wrong, someone did something to someone, right? Someone else. And there's generally a victim type attitude. In radical forgiveness, there's a consciousness that nothing wrong has happened. There are no victims. There are no victims, right? And life is not random. We have attracted into our life people that resonate with issues that we want to heal ourselves, right? So you can see a consciousness difference there. In traditional forgiveness, ego generally calls the shots. And the problem is with someone else out there, typically, right? That's many times what people think. In radical forgiveness, we look to ourselves, right? The problem, if you want to use that choice of word, is really in me. And if there is an issue where you feel like someone has hurt you, it's really through those relationships, when you work through them, that we do grow and learn. Another difference I want to point out here between traditional and radical is, in a traditional realm, life is viewed, there's problems to be solved or punishment. How can I say that? Things happen to us for no reason. I'll go back to that phrase that shit happens, right? Sometimes people use, just things happen to us for no reason. That's traditional. And a radical, again, we see life as purposeful, and that, again, life is not random. We've attracted things in our life, or we've thought certain things, and that becomes our life. So there's that big difference between traditional and radical forgiveness. There are underlying spiritual concepts or levels of consciousness if we take a radical forgiveness approach. I'm just going to relay some of them, but it's the construct of oneness. We're all connected. The concept, again, I've said that life is not random. There's cause and effect. There's an aspect of life where we have attracted someone or a situation in our life so that we can learn and grow from that. I'm repeating a little bit of what I just said, but just trying to emphasize. We also believe in our consciousness that, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So, we live both of those worlds. I know for me, sometimes I'm at a level of spiritual consciousness that's just beautiful. And other times, quite, my humanness comes in. Like I said earlier, I had a situation where I wanted to just attack, get defensive. That was my immediate response. Fortunately, I worked through it a little bit. Again, radical forgiveness is nothing wrong has taken place. That's hard. That's hard, actually. I know for me, that's hard to believe that sometimes. And there's nothing to forgive. That's also equally hard. So I'm just acknowledging the differences here between traditional and radical, and I'm acknowledging, this is an opinion, that the radical forgiveness process can sometimes be pretty hard. It can be very hard. So I'd like to talk about the 5 steps that, again, Colin, he has a worksheet with 22 questions, and you can roll that up to about 5 steps. And that's what I'm going to discuss here. As I discuss the 5 steps, I'm going to use an experience that I had, not the recent one because I'm still working through it, but a hurt that I experienced with one of my parents, my father, and I'm only going to really talk about an aspect of that. Reverend Lynn and Reverend Sue Ellen are aware of this because, obviously in my practitioner training, we talked about things like this. And in fact, I'll be honest, is that when I went through the first round of practitioner training in 2009, 2010, that's when I really worked through some of these significant pain that I had with my family, using different spiritual level of consciousness and employing the steps in radical forgiveness. So anyway, back to 5 steps. The first step, when you're dealing again with forgiveness, is to tell your story to yourself. And begin from where you are and feel the pain. And so, for example, when I was doing that with my father, as again, I'll talk about just a part of it, acknowledge that it was a complicated relationship. I mean, I actually had a long period of time where I did not care for him. And there were specific comments that he made that still, I know today, where he called me a piece of cancer. You have to cut out that piece of cancer and remove it in order for the rest of the family to survive. And then I remember like another comment, and these are the only 2 things I'll say of the story, where he had said, if I had had all daughters with your mom, I would have divorced her a long time ago. Well, those are hurtful statements, obviously, to a young child. So I captured the story. I feel the pain. The second step is to feel the feelings. Actually acknowledge the feelings of the situation. Don't deny them, but to really feel them, because as humans, we do feel. And so, yes, for me, in this situation, I was very hurt, and I felt unloved, way unloved. The third step, and I'm cutting to the chase here, guys, obviously, and I'm sharing a very personal situation, and this took decades. I'm not saying it happened overnight, but in any event, I'm trying to give examples. You tell your story, you feel the feelings, and then the next step is to collapse the story. And what is meant by that is, and this is where your spiritual consciousness comes in, you focus on the beliefs that you as an individual had as a result of this situation. And we recognize in our spiritual consciousness that many times our beliefs are false beliefs. They're not the truth. And so in my case, I had a false belief of, that I am totally unworthy. I just am not worth anything. And at least I acknowledge that this is a belief that I had. And through my spiritual training and consciousness awareness, I recognize that's a false belief. So the next step then is to shift the story, and in the forgiveness, you're feeling a certain way again. You recognize there's a belief that you have about yourself that's false. And now you shift the story so that false belief is not there, and you focus on the truth. And you recognize you have these thoughts from this interaction with somebody, and you take responsibility for your thoughts, right? and you recognize what's the truth. And in this case, the truth is I am worthy. I am, and again, it was a long process for me to reframe the story and then actually integrate that change in my thinking into my life. But that is what the radical forgiveness is. And I chose in this example to give you a very large situation, painful situation. You can use this same process, even if it's just a much smaller dynamic that you have with an individual in a meeting, say, or outside of a meeting. But anyway, those 5 steps, I'm just going to repeat them again. You tell your story, you feel the feelings of that particular situation, you collapse it, and identify the false belief that you have of yourself as part of that. Then you reframe the story, knowing the truth of that belief for you in that situation. And then the last step is, again, integrating that into your life. And you live that, knowing that truth. And then that's really true forgiveness, the radical forgiveness. Those are the 5 steps. It's instead of blaming the other person and condemning the other person, you're viewing the situation as a learning and growth opportunity for yourself to deepen your own consciousness, your spiritual being. And growing. That to me is the biggest difference. Now, I did shift in this example with my father. I did shift ultimately of not condemning him, not hating him, to one of accepting him. And that even blossomed even more when, as part of my reframing the story, you recognize not only the divinity in yourself, you recognize that everybody is divine. And I recognize that in my father, and I recognize that in myself. And then in recognizing that divinity in myself and my father, an outcome of that is I recognized his human and mine frailties, right? And you can forgive that part. Anyway, okay. So I do have some additional thoughts on radical forgiveness. Accountability for yourself is important. Taking responsibility also for your part of any interaction is important. Being accountable, because rarely in life anything is just one way, right? I did some things that hurt my father, but in any event, so taking accountability is important. Seeing the divinity, and I already said this, I'm just going to repeat it again. Seeing the divinity in others and in yourself is a huge, huge element of forgiveness. Knowing that truly the God light is in all, and every now and then we do funky human things. that allows you to see beyond what's on the surface. See beyond what's on the surface. And you see yourselves as one, right? You're all connected. And the goal is to shift your energy of getting defensive and attack, right? And condemn, to shift the energy of reconciliation. And I believe as part of that, that seeing the divinity in others, that love that's really what transforms. And there's obviously in other conversations, we've talked about how, there's different levels of love, but truly approaching a hurtful situation with love is important. You don't want to stay in a feeling of pain or suffering or fear. Anyway, and a level of consciousness, truly having a knowing that spirit or whatever is happening knows exactly what is going on. What is happening is exactly what is to happen. God does not make mistakes. And last but not least, I want to say forgiveness is a journey. There's different types of things you'd need to forgive or want to forgive in your life. Real deep things that might take decades, right? Or like I just described, or other things that might take weeks or just a matter of seconds. There's a couple other things, points I wanted to make. See what time it is. That's about all I'd like to say regarding Colin tipping and the radical forgiveness. It's a pretty extensive process. Emmett Fox in the Sermon on the Mount had some salient points I'd like to emphasize. In addition, he's got a technique too, which largely relies on prayer. And I do believe that prayer is a key part of this process, including even the 5 steps that I just said, although I didn't emphasize it. So let me just say a couple of his really good words here, just a few of them. Forgiveness of others is a vestibule of heaven. Nice. Heaven on earth, right? Forgiveness of others. We have got to forgive to make progress. Back to the point that I was just saying of, in situations like the one I'm dealing with now as part of my neighborhood volunteer work, you forgive and you make progress. You make progress for yourself and you make progress for maybe even potentially the other person and the situation. Well, this one is an interesting one. When you hold resentment against anyone, and I'm quoting verbatim in the book, you are bound to that person by a cosmic link. You are tied by that link to the thing that you hate. So you'd want to forgive, right? The one person perhaps in the world to whom you most dislike, I'm using his words, is the very one to whom you are attaching yourself by a hook that's stronger than steel. And the point is forgiveness would set you free, set others free. Forgiveness breaks that link. You don't want to be attached. Not that way anyway. So forgive When you forgive, you cut all ties. And it's a clear and spiritual act. He has a very beautiful prayer in his book. Beautiful. I would encourage, if you don't have the book, you may want to get it. Well, there's a lot of really good, obviously, the whole discussion is much broader than just forgiveness.
Dianne?
I found that, yes.
How do you spell his last name? Tipping? Is it Tipping?
Fogg.
Colin
Oh,
Tipping?
oh. Yes. Tipping.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. And so, I find that for me, it does help me again to write down my story, acknowledge my feelings, and then go through this step of knowing what's really true. I have also found in working with others that this process that Colin recommends in the identification of how you feel, that if you, sometimes you need to have discussions with others, right? That instead of accusing them, blaming them, you take an approach of talking about, well, this is how I feel. And I have found that in certain circumstances to be a very effective way to work through conflict and ultimately forgiveness, instead of, going back to someone, you, is to really think through on how you feel about the situation. And then, of course, take ownership, that accountability that I talked about for any part that you contributed to it, and then express that to the individual if you need to have a conversation on things, on something. And then, of course, prayer. Oh my gosh. This thing that I've been working through with, that's what I did. I walked through these basic steps. I said a lot of prayer, still am. I probably wrote about 5 different email, didn't send. And it was just funny to me to watch how it shifted though. And my approach did go away from a you to one of more spiritual consciousness. The prayer and the steps actually help. So I'm going to pause there, stop there. That's really the essence of what I wanted to say and share. We can do one of 2 things here, is just have open conversation just about whatever's top of mind about the process. If you all have experiences and little tidbits you want to share, we can do that. Or I can facilitate a contemplative session with you where we go through a few of those steps. You can just do it in silence. Let me just ask, is there a preference on what we do at this point?
Well, I'm inspired to say something as usual. Well, in communication, like imago type of communication, they say that the issue, the feeling is the issue. And so I really like these steps here that talk about really defining that feeling and feeling it and embracing the feeling, and then restoring or however you put that. I have it written down here, but Yes, and forgiveness does more for when we're doing it than it does for the other person, unless we actually go to that other person that may be feeling an error toward us, in that situation. It's not always necessary to do that, but when we don't forgive, there's an incompleteness within us that creates a conflict. And it might be remorse, or something along those lines, remorse or guilt, and that guilt is part of the self-responsibility in a way, because we're owning what we did, but disparaging ourselves for it. So forgiving the self has to happen, I think, first, before you can reach out, perhaps, or just do it in prayer, because the prayer is also building that self-forgiveness. So that's very useful. I'm not saying I'm any master at it. And I mean, I won't go into my past, but there was a lot of invalidation kind of stuff in my mind, right? But I think of the Course of Miracles when I say this next thing. The Course of Miracles parallels some of the science of mind stuff, of course, but their premise is nothing real can threaten, and nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Okay, so simple, paradoxical, simple statement, but so filled with meaning. And the real is the spiritual. And so the ego you mentioned early on in this, is always, the culprit, pretty much, so it's recognizing all that and assuming personal power, to move from fear to from pain and fear to power, but it's kind of delusional, when we believe of attack, and that's what miracles now. We can take or leave that in interpretation. Yes, attack is an experience, but it's not based on the real. Okay, and nothing real exists. So that's kind of, it's hard to wrap the mind around that. For me, it is anyway. I mean, because I've been through enough of these situations to feel, the guilt, the remorse, the blame, all that stuff. And there's that little white space, I call it, of time. It's an instant of time between a stimulus and our response to that stimulus. There's that little space in there where, if we're aware of, use it, then to back, go there, that's a choice, it's choosing a polar opposite in that moment. And that's where our practice helps. But it takes a lot of practice. I mean, it's relative to, it doesn't have to, but it can take a lot of time to develop that in ourselves. So I'll just leave it there for now. That's my takeaway.
Thank you. I appreciate your input, Clark, as always. I'm sure, and we all do. And feeling is so important. And as you said, our spiritual consciousness with prayer helps us in dealing with these situations. And we do have that little white space of time where we have choice on how are we going to respond. Thank you for your input there. Yes, Joanne, you had your hand up first.
Yes, and I kind of pinged on the whole feeling part too. I happen to be currently reading a book on nonviolent communication, and the process, and then that's by Marshall Rosenberg, and that process that he outlines in nonviolent communication is, first of all, let's say somebody's done something to upset you. So the concrete actions, first of all, we're supposed to observe, and we're supposed to remain neutral in our observing. Observe from, I like the phrase, observing behind your eyes, from behind your eyes, with a bit of a detachment. You see something that you may not like, or somebody, observes something they don't like. And the second part of that is then trying to pinpoint the feelings in relation to what we observed. Okay. That could be for yourself, if you have that particular, if it upsets you, that action upsets you, or if there is a person in a discussion who's becoming argumentative. Okay. And then looking at those feelings and trying to discern what the need or the values or the desires that created that feeling, what need is behind that. And that can be ascertained by asking questions. And then the concrete actions that person or that I could myself request in order to, help with that need that's been identified. In my mind, I can see the how it's related to forgiveness. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm verbalizing it well, but it's really interesting. You observe what's happening, and then when you're trying to pinpoint that need, and you're trying to become consciously aware, to interact, to engage that awareness within you, and being accurate in pinpointing that feeling for that person or for yourself is interesting. You have to look at the language that may come out of your mouth or the other person's mouth, and is it one of blame, like we talked about before? Is it a value judgment? Is it against a belief? Is it a bias? Is it a denial of responsibility? So there's a number of things, and then once you're able to ask questions, to ask follow-up questions, or ask yourself questions, what's happening here? Why am I feeling this way? What is it that I need from others or from myself? Or what does that person need that's sitting across the table from me? And then trying to make a request to help fulfill that need. You're requesting of yourself, or you're requesting in prayer, or you're requesting of that other person. How can I help you feel less likely to this or that? And you may not be able to provide that request, but you're listening to them, or you're listening to yourself, and you can further reflect on that. So I just thought that was really interesting that this current book that I'm reading ties in so well with the examples that you gave on forgiveness. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joanne. Nonviolent Communication by Marcia Rosenberg.
Marshall.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'll put the name of the book.
Marshall. Got it. I said Marcia, but right, Marshall. Thank you for that. And I
I just
agree. I
say
mean,
one
there's a
thing?
lot of course.
I just want to apologize to Joanne. I didn't mean to step on your raised hand. I didn't notice it. So I spoke first and you probably should have spoken first. So I'm just apologizing for that.
Oh, no, I didn't turn it up to put my hand up until after you started speaking. You're good.
Oh, okay. All right. I just heard Joanne had her hand up first and I heard that. So I thought maybe I'd missed it. So, okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
No, no, thank you for that, Clark. No, yeah, Reverend Lynn and Susan Julie both have their hands up. That's why I was saying that. So I want to say, I agree very quickly here, Joanne, that, there was a lot of parallelism in the 4 steps you outlined and the 5 I talked about, right?
Mhm.
And keying in on the feel, right? And then discerning the need, which, from a spiritual perspective, what is the truth given a particular situation? Thank you. Reverend Lynn.
Forgiveness is such a big topic for a lot of people. And I think, I don't have to say that. I think being practitioners and working with what Science of Mind teaches us gives us a little advantage over the process. And because teaching us about oneness and about spiritual mind treatment and our place in the universe, sort of, in God. But I have to say that when I started with Science of Mind, became a practitioner, there was so many things in my life I wanted to forgive. And I went on a quest to understand what I called spiritual forgiveness versus earthy forgiveness. And, third dimensional forgiveness is what I called it. And Colin Tippin's book was the first thing that was recommended to me. So I worked with it for a really long time. And I found it really helpful. And then I wanted to reach out and find more processes that dealt with spiritual forgiveness, because it's such a big thing. And I found that not one process covered all of my emotions and situations. And Clark mentioned Course in Miracles. I read and followed Course in Miracles that was taught by Gary Renard in Disappearance of the Universe, which is a little different format than the regular route with the big books. And Disappearance of the Universe has a really wonderful little prayer that you can do, but you have to go through his process of understanding why it works. And it has to do with there's nothing that we're not involved in or that comes to us that we're not a part of. We're always a part of it. We're always drawing things to us. And I wanted to show this little book, Unconditional Love and Forgiveness by Edith Stauffer. And I don't know if it's in print anymore. I had a hard time finding it. And I learned about this book, and this is not about just the same kind of spiritual forgiveness. She focuses on unfulfilled expectations that cause so much anger and disharmony. We have expectations about people in our lives and what they should do, and then what we build in ourselves around that, and then how to forgive ourselves and forgive the situation, and then that aspect of the other person. And it's one of those things that was a real life kind of thing. It was introduced at the ministers' conference in San Diego. I think it was in 2014 or 2015 by Reverend Harry Morgan, because he was having difficulty where his legs weren't working and he was on crutches. And when he learned about this woman, Edith Stauffer, he went to see her in person, and he walked into her house, or basically hobbled into her house on crutches, and spent a weekend with her doing these processes nonstop, and then walked out on his own afterward. And then in his little workshops, had people kind of go through the process. So, so it's an interesting book if you can find it. And I'll be honest that I haven't finished the book. I've had it for a number of years. Let me hold up again. But I've used the processes a little bit, what I got out of it. And there's a worksheet you can put together as a practitioner and work with clients. And I found it fascinating. The fear to faith process I did with Susan Jolie was wonderful. But for me, it's like, there's so much to, I get this little rat treadmill in my head that wants to keep going and keep bringing up situations in my mind, and then I'll go to a different process to work with it. And I find that different processes will hit me on different onion layers, to kind of move things. And, but it's so important. God, it's so important. I'm glad you brought this up tonight. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you, Reverend Lynn. Appreciate your sharing. And especially, and thank you for the reference, right? Or multiple references, the Course in Miracles and the unconditional love. And appreciate the comment that you're saying that there's different processes for different situations. It's nice to have these different tools. And I do agree. I mean, for me, when I discovered Science of Mind, that was a turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had never been able to forgive. Yeah. Susan Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the reminder that I needed. It is a process, and it's a process of forgiveness all the time. And I just want to note that you did, there was an interesting hand gesture that you did at, in the beginning. You were doing this number, right? And you were pointing the finger. And that classic, how many fingers are pointing back at me, right? It's your fault. And there's 3 pointing back. And I get it. I get it. And I love it. And I also have been working with the Emmett Fox, the Sermon on the Mount. In there is the Lord's Prayer, which is phenomenal. Troward has some chapters in his book on the Bible mystery and the Bible meaning that is phenomenal, that triggered my 2 months of working with the Lord's Prayer. And forgiveness is a big piece of that, and it's phenomenal work. Thank you for bringing that, and the reminder of Colin Tippins. And I had put the Emmett Fox book down for a minute, and it's just like, okay, well, you know what? It's not time to put it down yet. Here it is again. And I love the bringing in the conscious communication, because that's something that I have been talking with a friend of mine about. Hey, maybe we need to look at conscious communication in this study, which I have not done, but I think it's a good piece to bring in. And it's absolutely, Reverend Lynn, you did, your idea, your thought in that there are so many different modalities to bring in forgiveness, and that it appears for me that there are different, certain things come up at a certain time, and whatever gets triggered at that particular moment in time may need something new that I hadn't been doing. There was there's, the water's been flowing, and then all of a sudden there's this little dam that's been created, and there's a blockage. And so bringing in a new form, a new technique, a new modality of being able to just move that and allow that flow to move back again, and just continue in that process. Because it really is, the more that we learn and we bring in new ideas, and all we need. And I love, Reverend Sue Ellen, you shared with me that pivot, and I've been using that. It's just that one little thing that we need, that pivot just a little bit to open up the new vista. But I really appreciate the reminder of how important forgiveness is. And Emmett Fox talks about it being a daily practice, that forgiveness comes, that we bring in forgiveness as a daily practice. So it's something that is always, for whatever it may be, right? I mean, there's for whatever's showing up, either in our personal lives or that which we're seeing in the world that is up for truth revealing, right? Truth, which we forgive, we bring the truth, the revealing of truth, which is one of the processes. What's the truth of the situation? So thank you so much. Thank you. And there's a lot of, for those that know or may not know, that there's a reminder for those that do know, that on the Colin Tippin's website, there's the free download that you can get those different forms. He has more than one. So excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Dianne. That was fabulous.
No, thank you, Susan, Julie. I appreciate your comments. And I love the eloquence of you, how you speak, pivoting to open up new vistas. That's lovely. Yes, Clark, yes. Hi, Clark.
I've got a class in 1 minute. I've got to go on another Zoom thing. So love you all. Thank you. It's a great talk tonight. Dianne, thank you so much. I'll send you an email. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. We're about ready to wrap up, but I would like to offer Reverend Sue Ellen if you have gems that you would like to share. You always do.
I have no gems today.
Your presence then is a gem. We'll keep.
I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate everybody's input. It was all awesome. I don't have anything to add. You guys have covered it pretty thoroughly. So thank you. I'm gonna see if I can find your book by Edith Stouffer. The others I have.
Is that ST? Yeah, I don't have the unconditional one either.
Spell that,
Thank you.
Reverend?
Well, gosh.
AUFFER. Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Is there anything else, or shall I do a closing benediction here? And
Contribution.
I always forget about that. I'm sorry. So yes, we are part of Inner Journey. And if you so choose to donate just a little snippet to Inner Journey to help with the evolution of consciousness, that would be beautiful. You can go online to innerjourney.org or text. The number to text is 405-337-9739. And my word is faith. Okay, I'd like to just say a few words here in closing. And I invite, if you so choose, each one of you to close your eyes, and in the knowing of the closing of your eyes, you are hugging yourself in that intimate moment with yourself. And the hugging of yourself, that's the embracing of the God within. For I know that each of us are God expressing. And I give thanks for this evening, for the wisdom, the love, the sharing that occurred about forgiveness. For definitely this evening was God expressing, love sharing, spirit abound. And I know that beyond this evening, that each of us continue to evolve and grow, and ever in the deepening of our spiritual consciousness, and that we do as Susan Julie said with Emmett Fox, daily forgiveness, continuous forgiveness of ourselves, of each other's, recognizing that we are humans, but we are also spiritual beings with that beautiful power and strength and knowing. And I know that beyond this evening, that each of us take our spiritual beings and we uplift ourselves and we uplift others and we live a life of forgiveness. And I am grateful, I am so grateful to share this evening with each one of you. So grateful. So grateful for God, so grateful for life, so grateful for being. And together we say, and so it is.
Yes.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Thank you.